That old tattoo looked like nothing special. Just a faded design inked decades ago, nearly lost in the wrinkles and pale skin of an aging arm. A group of middle-aged men sitting around the center table at New Holland Central Restaurant noticed it and exchanged a chuckle, glancing toward the elderly man seated alone in the far corner. He was a thin figure, hunched slightly as he sat, with snow-white hair slicked back over a weathered scalp. His brown coat had seen better days, frayed at the cuffs, the collar bleached from sun and time. The left sleeve was pushed up, and the skin beneath revealed a faint, weathered tattoo, a dagger piercing through an anchor, its ink faded to a shade barely darker than the liver spots nearby. The old man sat quietly with a glass of water and a metal tray holding eggs, toast, and a small cup of fruit. He made no move to acknowledge the laughter or the stares. His name was Robert Ellis, though no one in the restaurant knew that yet. They didn't know that the metal prosthetic leg beneath the table bore the weight of memories more than the weight of his body. They didn't know about the minefield, the medevac, or the promise made before everything went to hell. From the center table, a short man in a bright windbreaker leaned toward his friend. "Look at that old-timer," he said. "Bet he inked that thing in his garage." His friend smirked. "What kind of soldier doesn't even carry a vet ID?" Their voices weren't loud, but just enough to carry. Robert didn't react. He never did. He simply raised the glass of water to his lips and took a slow sip, his hands steady despite the tremors in his knees. A server walked toward him hesitantly, glancing once toward the manager before approaching Robert's table. She was young, no older than 20, and wore a red apron and a plastic name tag that said, Jessica. She looked nervous as she stopped in front of him, shifting her weight from foot to foot. "I'm really sorry, sir," she said, her voice soft but shaking, "but someone complained. They said that you're making some guests uncomfortable." Robert looked up at her, eyes patient and tired, the corners crinkled from 1,000 small disappointments. He didn't say a word. "If you wouldn't mind," Jessica continued, "there's seating outside. It's quieter and, well, maybe a bit more peaceful." Robert didn't argue. He simply gave a small nod and reached for his tray. As he stood, he leaned heavily on a black cane with a taped-up grip. His right arm held the tray. His left shoulder tilted awkwardly, struggling to balance. The metal leg squeaked slightly as he took his first step. No one offered to help. No one moved. Even the child waiting with his parents in line pointed openly. "Daddy," the boy asked, "why does that man walk funny?" His father pulled him close and whispered, "Don't stare, son. He's just a homeless man." As Robert shuffled past the table of laughing men, one of them leaned back and said with a sneer, "If that guy's a SEAL, then I must be a 5-star general." Laughter followed. Robert didn't turn. He didn't flinch. But as he reached the door, a single tear slipped from the corner of his eye and landed silently on the tile floor. The manager, a clean-cut man in a blue polo, glanced at the scene from behind the counter. For a moment, he looked uncertain, like he might step in, say something, stop the humiliation playing out so casually in his restaurant. But then a customer waved, needing help with a drink order, and the moment passed. Outside, the late morning sun was harsh, and Robert squinted against the brightness. The outdoor patio had only 3 tables, all empty. Most guests preferred to be inside, near the warmth of chatter and clinking plates. He made his way to the farthest table, placing his tray down gently. The chair groaned under his weight as he sat. His prosthetic leg ached from the short walk. The eggs had grown cold. Still, he took a bite, chewing slowly as he looked through the glass at the bustling restaurant he had just been pushed out of. Inside, laughter and the clinking of silverware continued. The glass separated 2 worlds, the inside full of life and conversation, and the outside holding only the lonely silhouette of an old man no one remembered. But Robert didn't come here to be remembered. He didn't come for the discount either. Every year, on Veterans Day, he picked a different place, not to be thanked, but to remember. Decades ago, in 1971, Robert was a logistics specialist with SEAL Team Bravo, deployed in Southeast Asia. He wasn't the kind of soldier that movies are made about. He didn't storm beaches or clear rooms. His work was quieter. It involved maps, supplies, communication codes. But it was just as vital. On one mission near the Laosian border, his team was assigned to establish a resupply route through treacherous terrain. The goal: deliver life-saving gear and medical kits to small teams operating deep in enemy-held territory. It was dangerous work. Coordination required precision, silence, and timing. And it was Robert who had memorized every foot of the route. 8 miles from their extraction point, they hit a minefield. The explosion sent him flying. His left leg was gone before he hit the ground. His best friend, James Harrington, was leading point. The blast hit him squarely. Robert could still see the medic zipping up the bag, his ears ringing, blood on his face, and a cold ache spreading up his thigh. But he had remembered the coordinates. He had forced himself awake, guiding the medevac team through fading radio signals and poor weather. 17 wounded were evacuated that day. 5 lives saved directly from his orders. And 1 life lost. James had once shown him a photograph of New Holland's Central Restaurant. "Best burgers this side of the Rockies," James said with a grin. "When we get home, I'm buying you one." Robert had kept that photo. Folded, yellowed, worn along the edges. And every year since, he came to a new place, had a meal, and thought of James. Not once had anyone ever recognized him. Not once had he mentioned his story. He had returned home to no parade, no medals, just a silent bus ride to a quiet apartment in Colorado. He opened a small garage and fixed cars for a living. He didn't hang any photos or flags. But his neighbors called him Rob, the guy who'll fix your muffler for a cup of coffee. He taught local kids to change oil, showed high school dropouts how to install brake pads. When families couldn't pay, he waived the cost. When no one had time to listen, he kept his memories close. The only trace of his past was that faded tattoo. The dagger through the anchor. Not a regulation mark, but one designed by his team. All 8 of them wore it. Maybe he was the last now. Inside the restaurant, Jessica, the waitress, stood by the drink station watching him through the window. Her stomach churned. She had followed the manager's orders, but it didn't sit right. Something in the man's posture, the quiet way he carried himself, didn't match the image of a beggar or a nuisance. As she stood there, the door opened. A young man entered wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans. His hair was cropped close on the sides, longer on top, and his posture spoke volumes. Straight-backed, purposeful. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on the patio. He stopped. He had seen that tattoo before. In training. In textbooks. In lectures. Jackson Miles, 27 years old, active SEAL, had returned home on brief leave. He wasn't looking for inspiration, he thought he was grabbing a quiet lunch. But the moment he saw the tattoo, his heart skipped. That wasn't just a design. That was the mark of LSG-7, the logistics officer whose field plans were still being taught in SEAL training. He moved with urgency across the restaurant, ignoring the glances, the servers, the noise. As he reached the door to the patio, he paused only briefly before stepping outside and walking straight to the table. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice clear but respectful. "Were you with SEAL Team Bravo?" Robert looked up, surprised. "Long time ago," he said, voice gravelly. "But yes. I was." Jackson stood straighter, his arms stiff at his sides. Then he lifted one hand in a perfect salute, feet together, eyes straight ahead. Robert blinked. "What are you doing, son?" "You're LSG-7, Jackson said, saluting firmly. "We learn about your extractions in training camp." "Sir, it's an honor." Robert said nothing. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes welled with something deeper than surprise. He nodded. Inside, the restaurant had grown quiet. A few patrons near the windows had noticed the interaction. The four men at the center table had stopped chewing. One of them dropped his fork. Jackson turned toward the dining room. His voice carried clearly now. This restaurant has no right to ask this man to leave. If anyone here is uncomfortable in the presence of a legend, then perhaps they should be the ones to step outside. The silence that followed was total. Jessica clutched a tray to her chest, eyes wide. The manager slowly emerged from the back, his expression pale. One elderly woman near the window stood slowly, placing her hand over her heart. Then another. A middle-aged couple stood up as well, followed by a young mother with her child. A hush spread over the room, not from fear, but from respect. Robert didn't move. He stared at the young man before him and whispered, "Thank you, son. That's more than I've heard in 50 years. Jackson stepped forward and offered his hand. "May I sit with you, sir? I'd be honored to hear about your friend." Robert nodded slowly, motioning to the empty chair across from him. The two men sat, the past and the present bridging decades with a single gesture. Inside, no one moved. The four men who had mocked him earlier stood awkwardly. One of them looked toward the door, face red, and walked out without finishing his meal. The others followed, silent. Jessica pushed open the patio door and approached with fresh coffee. Her voice trembled as she set the cups down. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "My grandfather served in Vietnam, too. He never talked about it. I think he might have known you." Robert looked up at her carefully. "What was his name?" "James Harrington," she said softly. "I never met him. He died before I was born." Robert's hand reached slowly into his jacket pocket. From within, he pulled out a worn photo, the one James had once shown him. He slid it across the table. "He promised to buy me a burger here someday," Robert said, voice thick. "I've been coming every year to keep that promise." Jessica stared at the photo, her hand trembling as it lifted to her mouth. Across the glass, no one spoke. The entire restaurant watched not with curiosity, but with reverence. And in that quiet space between the old man and the young soldier, something long buried had been unearthed, a memory honored, a silence broken. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the restaurant's patio. Inside, the usual lunchtime buzz had dimmed into a hushed reverence. Something about the presence of Robert Ellis had shifted the air itself. Conversations quieted. Phones were lowered. People lingered, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. Robert sat silently across from Jackson, the young SEAL who had recognized more than just a tattoo. In front of them sat two half-finished coffees and the worn photo of James Harrington. The man whose memory had drawn Robert here year after year. Between sips and silences, Robert told stories that had never before passed his lips. He didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He spoke plainly, in the measured tone of a man who had carried memories alone for far too long. He talked about the sweltering jungle nights, about the coded maps he drew by candlelight, about the laughter around cold rations and the unbearable stillness after an ambush. He spoke of James's terrible harmonica playing and the way he used to hum Patsy Cline songs while cleaning his rifle. Jessica, the waitress, James Harrington's granddaughter, had pulled up a chair at a respectful distance. She listened, wide-eyed, as Robert described the man she never met. She scribbled notes in a small notepad from her apron, her fingers shaking. A part of her, long buried and unnamed, had stirred to life. Her grandfather had always been a photo on the mantel. Now, he was a boy laughing under a jungle sky. Jackson didn't interrupt much. He just nodded, asked the right questions, and let the elder man speak. When Robert faltered, losing himself in memory, Jackson waited. The silence was never awkward. It was sacred. Inside the restaurant, someone had paid for Robert's meal without saying a word. Jessica only noticed when she brought the bill and found it stamped "Paid" in bold red ink. She suspected the manager had done it. He'd been walking a little differently since the moment Jackson called the old man a legend. As the last of the afternoon sun lit the patio in gold, Jessica stood, her voice trembling. "I think people need to hear this," she said. "Not just your stories, but what it's like after. What it costs to carry this kind of silence." Robert gave her a long, measured look. "Most people don't want to know," he said. "They want parades. Not pain." "Maybe," she replied. "But I do. And maybe others will too." That night, Jessica sat on her small bed with her laptop open, her notes spread around her. She wrote for hours, transcribing Robert's stories as best as she could. She searched for old SEAL records, public declassified reports, even images of his unit's patch. Most of what she found was redacted, incomplete. But she kept going. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't just working a side job at a restaurant, she was becoming a historian of something real. Meanwhile, Robert walked home. He didn't drive anymore. His leg wasn't up for it, and his truck had died years ago. His apartment was modest, just 3 blocks down, above a shuttered hardware store. The stairs were brutal, but he didn't mind. The pain reminded him that he was still here. That night, he pulled a shoebox from under his bed. Inside were letters from his mother, a photograph of his unit, James's last message scrawled on a ration box flap, and a sealed envelope with no address. He stared at the envelope for a long time, then put it back. The next morning, a knock came at the door. It was Jackson. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. Robert stepped aside wordlessly. Jackson looked around the tiny apartment. It smelled faintly of old books and pipe tobacco. A single plant sat on the windowsill. There were no medals. No photos on the wall. Just silence. "I went back to the restaurant," Jackson said. "Jessica's putting together a piece about you. She wants to submit it to the Veterans Archive in D.C. Robert sank slowly into his chair. "I didn't tell her for recognition." "I know. But she's not trying to make you famous. She just wants people to remember." Robert exhaled slowly. "Remembering is painful." Jackson nodded. "So is being forgotten." They sat in silence for a while. Jackson finally spoke again. "You saved 17 men. One of them was my instructor. He mentioned you once, said logistics guys saved more lives than anyone." Robert smiled faintly. "We carried the maps. But it was men like James who carried us." That day, Jackson took a picture of Robert. Not posed. Not dramatic. Just a candid shot of the old man sipping coffee by the window, sunlight catching the lines on his face and the tattoo on his arm. Jackson emailed it to a contact at a local military museum. Within 3 days, they called back. 2 weeks later, a plaque appeared on the wall of the restaurant patio. Bronze. Simple. In honor of Robert Ellis, SEAL Team Bravo. For those who served in silence and carried the weight of memory. May we listen when they speak, and remember when they can't. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Local news picked it up. Veterans began arriving, quiet men and women who had once faded into the background, now showing up in dress jackets and service caps. They came not to be honored, but to sit. To share. To finally speak. The restaurant changed. The manager put up a board offering free meals to any veteran. A wall of black and white photos appeared near the counter, labeled "Voices We Forgot." Every week, someone brought in a new photo. Jessica became more than a waitress. She started an oral history project, recording interviews with veterans who had never spoken before. She launched a small podcast, The Silent Watch. Her first episode was Robert's story. Within a month, she had thousands of downloads. Emails poured in. Families who had never heard their parents speak about the war reached out, thanking her. Jackson extended his leave. He helped Jessica build a mobile booth they could take to nursing homes and VFW halls. Robert joined them when he could, though he rarely said much. He just listened. And then, one day, he didn't come. Jessica knocked on his door. No answer. She used the spare key he had given her. Inside, everything was neat. The shoebox sat open on the table. The photo of James had been framed. The sealed envelope was gone. Robert had died in his sleep. Peacefully. No hospital. No machines. Just quiet. At his small funeral, Jackson wore full dress uniform. Jessica read a letter Robert had written just days before. If someone is reading this, I hope they know I'm not gone. I've simply moved into memory, into stories, into lessons passed down. Don't make monuments of us. Make time. Sit. Listen. That's all we ever wanted. The envelope, it turned out, had been sent to James Harrington's family. Inside was a letter written 50 years ago. Apologizing. Remembering. Promising to keep his friend's memory alive. James's widow, long since remarried and moved across the country, received it. She cried for hours. Then sent a note back. He kept that promise. Thank you. The restaurant still stands. Veterans still gather. And every Veterans Day, someone leaves a small harmonica on Robert's old table. No one ever takes it. No one ever needs to explain. Because some memories speak for themselves.